Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me add my welcome to all of you for having come here today. Congressman Kildee, our special friend in the House, Senator Inouye, and of course, Secretary Babbitt. I also want to offer special greetings to my predecessors who know the challenges of trying to run the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Most of all, of course, we want to welcome the tribal leaders who've come here today. Our only wish is that we could have had every single tribal leader be here, but of course they're probably busier than we are, and that's simply not possible. But I hope all of you will take the message that we share today to your colleagues, to your counterparts with the other tribes, and thank them as well for their service. I want to especially mention Susan Maston, who is the President of the National Congress of American Indians, Ron Allen, the first Vice President of the National Congress of American Indians as well, and I understand that the Executive Board, that we're most honored by your presence. I should also say that, as I have many times and will for the rest of my life, I suspect, that the greatest honor, the greatest privilege I've had in my life is to work with the people of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We day by day, do so many important and good things, and it's simply a privilege that I could never have anticipated, and one that is very difficult to describe. My respect for this institution and for the people in it is profound beyond words, and it has been one of the great joys of my life to discover just how capable, just how committed, just how honorable the people of the Bureau of Indian Affairs are. In March of 1824, President James Monroe established the Office of Indian Affairs in the Department of War. It's been 175 years of the institution that now is known as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Time when our leaders are reflecting on what lies ahead and preparing for those challenges. Before looking ahead, though, this institution must first look back and reflect on what it has wrought, and by doing so, come to know that, in truth, this is no occasion for celebration. Rather, it is a time for reflection, contemplation, a time for sorrowful truths to be spoken, a time for contrition. We must first reconcile ourselves to the fact that the works of this agency have at various times profoundly harmed the communities it was meant to serve. From the very beginning, the Office of Indian Affairs was an instrument by which the United States enforced its ambition against the Indian nations and the Indian people who stood in its path. And so the first mission of this institution was to execute the removal of the southeastern tribal nations. By threat, deceit, force, these great tribal nations were made to march 1,000 miles to the west, leaving thousands of their old, their young, and their infirm in hasty graves along the Trail of Tears. As the nation looked to the west for more land, this agency participated in the ethnic cleansing that befell the western tribes. War necessarily begets tragedy. The war for the West was no exception. Yet, in these more enlightened times, it must be acknowledged that the deliberate spread of disease, the decimation of the mighty bison herds, the use of the poison alcohol to destroy mind and body, and the cowardly killing of women and children made for tragedy on a scale so ghastly that it cannot be dismissed as merely the inevitable consequence of the clash of competing ways of life. This agency and the good people in it failed in the mission to prevent that devastation, and so great nations of patriot warriors fell. We will never push aside the memory of unnecessary and violent death at places such as Sand Creek, the banks of the Washita River, and Wounded Knee. Nor did the consequences of war have to include the futile and destructive efforts to annihilate Indian cultures. After the devastation of tribal economies and the deliberate creation of tribal dependence on the services provided by this agency set out to destroy all things Indian. This agency forbade the speaking of Indian languages, prohibited the conduct of traditional religious activities, outlawed tribal traditional government, and made Indian people ashamed of who they were. And worst of all, the Bureau of Indian Affairs committed these acts against the children entrusted to its boarding schools, brutalizing them emotionally, psychologically, physically, and spiritually. Even in this era of self-determination, when the Bureau of Indian Affairs is at long last serving as an advocate for Indian people in an atmosphere of mutual respect, the legacy of these misdeeds haunts us. The trauma of shame, fear, and anger has passed from one generation to the next and manifests itself in the rampant alcoholism, drug abuse, and domestic violence that plague Indian country. Many of our people live lives of unrelenting tragedy as Indian families suffer the ruin of lives by alcoholism, suicides made of shame and despair, and violent death at the hands of one another. So many of the maladies suffered today in Indian country result from the failures of this agency. Poverty, ignorance, and disease are the product of this agency's work. And so today, I stand before you as the leader of an institution that in the past has committed acts so terrible that they infect, diminish, and destroy the lives of Indian people decades later, generations later. These things occurred despite the efforts of many good people with good hearts who sought to prevent them. These wrongs must be acknowledged if the healing is to begin. Now, I do not speak today for the United States. That is the province of the nation's elected leaders, and I would not presume to speak on their behalf. I am empowered, however, to speak on behalf of this agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I am quite certain that the words that follow reflect the hearts of its 10,000 employees. Let us begin by expressing our profound sorrow for what this agency has done in the past. Just like you, when we think of these misdeeds and their tragic consequences, our hearts break, and our grief is as pure and complete as yours. We desperately wish that we could change this history, but of course we cannot. But on behalf of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I extend this formal apology to Indian people for the historical conduct of this agency. And while the BIA employees of today did not commit these wrongs, we acknowledge that the institution that we serve did. We accept this inheritance, this legacy of racism and inhumanity. And by accepting this legacy, we also accept the moral responsibility of putting things right. We therefore ask to begin this important work anew and make a new commitment to the people and communities that we serve, a commitment born of the dedication we share with you to the cause of renewed hope and prosperity for Indian country. Never again will this agency stand silent when hate and violence are committed against Indians. Never again will we allow policy to proceed from the assumption that Indians possess less human genius than the other races. Never again will we be complicit in the theft of Indian property. Never again will we appoint false leaders who serve purposes other than those of the tribes. Never again will we allow unflattering and stereotypical images of Indian people to deface the halls of government or lead the American people to shallow and ignorant beliefs about Indians. Never again will we attack your religions, your languages, your rituals, or any of your tribal ways. Never again will we seize your children nor teach them to be ashamed of who they are. Never again. We cannot yet ask your forgiveness, not while the burdens of this agency's history weigh so heavily on tribal communities. What we do ask is that together we allow the healing to begin. As you return to your homes,
And as you talk with your people, tell them the time of dying is at an end. Tell your children that the time of shame and fear is over. Tell your young men and women to replace their anger with love and hope for the people. Together, we must wipe the tears of 7 generations. Together, we must allow our broken hearts to mend. Together, we will face a challenging world with confidence and trust. Together, let us resolve that when our future leaders gather to discuss the history of this institution, it will be time to celebrate the rebirth of joy, freedom, and progress for Indian nations. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was born in 1824 in a time of war on Indian people. May it live in the year 2000 and beyond as an instrument of their prosperity. Thank you very much.